What if the plane you were riding suddenly became completely uncontrollable, not because of weather, not because of pilot error, but because of a tiny, visible flaw buried deep inside a spinning metal disc? On July 19, 1989, 296 passengers and crew aboard United Airlines Flight 23 boarded ADC 10 in Denver, Colorado, expecting nothing more than a routine trip to Chicago. The sky was clear, the air was calm, and the crew, 2 seasoned pilots and a flight engineer, had every reason to believe this would be just another ordinary flight. For nearly an hour, the plane cruised smoothly at altitude, the autopilot holding a heading of 95 degrees with quiet precision. Nobody on board had any idea that in a matter of seconds, their world was about to be turned violently upside down. This is the story of how 3 airplanes, 2 catastrophic failures, and 1 extraordinary group of human beings rewrote the history of aviation safety and what their ordeal teaches us about courage, teamwork, and the fragile line between disaster and survival. Stay with us, because what happens next is almost impossible to believe. The explosion that changed everything, with a thunderous bang that shook the entire aircraft. Everything changed. Flight engineer Dudley Dvorak immediately confirmed what everyone feared. The tail engine, the third of the DC-10S3 engines mounted at the base of the vertical fin, had catastrophically failed. Co-pilot William Records took over the controls while Captain Alfred Haynes launched into an emergency engine shutdown checklist. Losing one engine mid-flight is serious, but a DC-10 is engineered to fly onto. The situation felt manageable until it suddenly wasn't. When the pilots attempted to steer the aircraft back to a stable course, nothing responded. Not the ailerons, not the rudder, not the elevators. Every single control surface was dead. Flight engineer Dvorak delivered the diagnosis that would send a chill through every aviation expert who later heard it. The plane had lost all hydraulic fluid. On a commercial aircraft, hydraulic pressure is the lifeblood of control. It is the invisible force that translates a pilot's inputs into the movement of every wing surface. Without it, the plane was, for all practical purposes, a 200-ton projectile, 1 in a billion. To understand just how impossible this situation was, consider this: the DC-10 carries not 1, but 3 completely independent hydraulic systems. Engineers designed them this way precisely so that a failure in one would never compromise the others. The probability of losing all 3 simultaneously was estimated at 1 in a billion. So remote that aviation manuals contained no emergency procedure for it. There was simply no protocol, because it was never supposed to happen. And yet, here they were, flying a plane with no controls at 37,000 feet. The reason all 3 systems failed traces back to the physics of the engine explosion itself. Though the hydraulic lines run separately through most of the aircraft, they converge in close proximity near the rear engine. When the fan disc shattered due to a microscopic metallurgical defect that had been cracking silently with every single flight the plane had ever taken, the resulting shrapnel tore through all 3 lines at once. Hydraulic fluid drained away completely in seconds, leaving the crew with one remaining tool to fly with: the throttles of the 2 wing engines. It was a desperate hand to play. Lessons written in tragedy. Japan Airlines Flight 123. 4 years earlier, on August 12, 1985, a Boeing 747SR operated by Japan Airlines lifted off from Tokyo's Haneda Airport carrying 524 people, the largest single aircraft passenger load ever recorded at that time. The flight to Osaka was expected to take just 1 hour. What no one knew was that hidden in the rear of the plane, a ticking time bomb had been quietly building with every flight cycle since a botched repair following a tail strike years before. The pressure bulkhead, the curved wall that keeps the pressurized cabin sealed, had been incorrectly repaired with 2 splice plates instead of 1. Just 12 minutes after takeoff, the bulkhead ruptured with catastrophic force. Pressurized air exploded into the unpressurized tail section, blowing off the entire vertical stabilizer and severing all 4 hydraulic lines. The crew battled the uncontrollable aircraft for 32 agonizing minutes, using differential engine thrust to attempt steering, the exact same technique that would later be used aboard Flight 232. They came agonizingly close to reaching an airport. Instead, the plane struck a ridge near Mount Osutaka. Of the 524 people aboard, only 4 survived. With 520 fatalities, it remains the deadliest single aircraft accident in aviation history. The stranger who could help. Back aboard Flight 232, fate intervened in an unexpected way. A flight attendant heading to the cockpit for an update was stopped by a passenger seated near the front of first class. He was calm, almost unnervingly so, and he asked a precise, knowledgeable question. Had all hydraulics truly been lost? His name was Dennis Fitch, and he was no ordinary traveler. Fitch was a DC-10 flight instructor for United Airlines. He literally trained other pilots on the very aircraft now falling apart around him. He knew the plane's systems better than almost anyone alive. Fitch had studied the Japan Airlines disaster in depth. He knew what the loss of all hydraulics meant. He also knew that the Japanese crew had fought heroically and still lost. But he believed that with a second pair of experienced hands on the throttles, Flight 232 might have a fighting chance. He offered his help to Captain Haynes, who didn't hesitate. Fitch took a position standing between the 2 pilots, gripping one throttle in each hand. adjusting engine power in real time based on visual cues and Haynes commands. 4 professionals, 1 broken plane, and a destination less than 100 miles away, flying blind toward Sioux City. Chicago was out of the question. The aircraft could never make it that far. Air traffic control directed the crew to Sioux City's Gateway Airport in Iowa, roughly 85 miles away. The challenge was that without hydraulics, the plane kept drifting into a right-hand bank. Rather than fight it and risk losing what little control they had, Captain Haynes made a counterintuitive decision: let the plane spiral right. The crew corkscrewed their path towards Sioux City in wide right-hand loops, using a TC guidance to stay oriented. At one point, Haynes openly told controllers he had serious doubts about making the runway at all. Inside the cabin, 52 children were aboard, many traveling alone as part of United's special Children's Day promotion, which allowed kids to fly for just 1 penny. Flight attendants calmly relocated passengers so no child sat without an adult beside them. The 4 infants too young for seats were placed on cabin floors surrounded by pillows, following protocol with heartbreaking care. Meanwhile, the crew dumped fuel to reduce landing weight and managed to manually lower the landing gear using gravity alone. They were approaching at more than double the normal landing speed, with no flaps and no steering, heading toward a closed runway that emergency crews were scrambling to clear. Impact and miracle. 2 minutes before touchdown, Captain Haynes realized with grim clarity that they were misaligned with their target runway. But fortune offered one last gift. They were nearly perfectly lined up with runway 22, the one that had been permanently decommissioned a year earlier and was now being used as staging ground for emergency responders. ATC immediately cleared all vehicles and gave Haynes the runway. With nothing left to do, he broadcast a single word over the PA brace. Every person on board gripped what they could and prepared for the worst. At the last moment, the plane dipped sharply to the right. The right wingtip struck the ground first, and the aircraft cartwheeled violently, breaking apart and erupting in flames as it skidded through cornfields beyond the runway. Emergency responders braced for another Japan Airlines. Instead, passengers began walking and crawling out of the wreckage. One man, escaping the burning fuselage, heard an infant crying from inside an overhead bin and went back in to rescue her, reuniting her with her mother. All 4 cockpit crew survived, including the heroic off-duty instructor Dennis Fitch. Of the 296 people aboard, 183 survived, a number that should have been 0. What these flights left behind, United Flight 232 and Japan Airlines Flight 123, will forever stand as the most extraordinary examples of human skill, communication, and determination in the history of aviation. The Japan Airlines crew kept an uncontrollable 747 in the air for over 30 minutes over mountainous terrain, an act described by experts as technically impossible. The Flight 232 crew turned a guaranteed catastrophe into a survivable event through what is now considered the definitive textbook example of crew resource management. Every person in that cockpit contributing, communicating, and trusting each other completely. These stories transformed how airlines train pilots worldwide, teaching not just technical skill, but the critical power of voice, collaboration, and humility in the cockpit. They remind us that when systems fail, human beings are still capable of extraordinary things. If this story moved you, we'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below and tell us what surprised you most. Subscribe to the World Documentaries for more stories that go deep behind the headlines, and share this video with someone who loves history, aviation, or simply remarkable human stories. Hit that like button and join our growing community of curious minds. We'll see you in the next documentary.